Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, I'll show you how easy it is to use MSAL, the Microsoft Authentication Library, to authenticate users in your Blazor Server app against any OAuth 2 identity provider using an Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. We're also going to secure a WebAPI app, only allowing access to authenticated users. Your users will also be able to create accounts in your AD B2C tenant using their email addresses and passwords. Azure does all the work, and you don't have the liability of storing their passwords. You might want to move out of the quiet car for this one, because authentication using MSAL and Azure AD B2C in Blazor is coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train. Blazor Train! So the first thing we need to do is create an ASP.NET Core Web API project. And I'm going to use all the defaults. We're going to call it Secure Web API. And just to show you what the template is, it has a weather forecast controller that returns bogus data. And if we run this, because Swagger is installed, we can just say get weather forecast, try it out, execute. It shows you the request, it shows you the response. Whoop-de-doo. All right, let's secure this thing. We're going to start by installing some packages. So I'm going to right-click on the project, select Manage NuGet Packages, go to Browse. You want to search for Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication.json. We want that one. We want Microsoft.Identity.Web. We want Microsoft.Identity.Web.MicrosoftGraph. And we want Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. Okay, now we're going to make some modifications to program CS. Right at the top, we're going to add these using statements. And then as soon as we have the builder, we're going to add all this blah, 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 blah. So builder.services, add authentication with the bearer defaults authentication scheme. Adding Microsoft Identity Web API with a section of the config we're calling Azure AD. Yes, we'll get to that. We're going to enable token acquisition to call downstream API using Microsoft Graph that gives us access to Azure AD. Add in-memory token caches and adding the downstream Web API, which we're going to get that configuration from a section called downstream API. Now down at the bottom before app.run, we're going to tell it to use authentication and use authorization. Now one other thing, we're going to go to the weather forecast controller and we're going to use the authorize attribute. Okay, let's dig into app settings. I'm going to make a change with a template from the repo. So here's our Azure AD section, our Microsoft Graph section, our downstream API section, and then the usual logging. So before we do anything here, we need an Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. And in previous episodes, I have used real tenants that I use in the real world and have therefore kind of blacked out the tenant ID, the client ID. But this time, I'm going to create a tenant from scratch. And we're only going to use it for this episode, and then I'll just destroy the whole thing. So in other words, I don't need to hide any of these things. I think that'll be easier for you as you go along with me because things won't be blacked out. You'll be able to recognize them. Okay? So let's go to the portal. So I'm going to search for Azure AD B2C. And I'm going to click on this Get Started link under Create an Azure AD B2C tenant. And that takes me to this tutorial on creating an Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. And here's what it tells me to do. It tells me to actually create a resource. So I'm going to create a resource. I'm going to search for Azure Active Directory B2C. And I'm going to click Create. And now I have the option of linking an existing Azure AD B2C tenant or creating a new one. So I'm going to create a new one. Make sure you check off Azure Active Directory B2C. Then I'm going to click Next, Configuration. And so this is where you set your initial domain name and your organization name. So I'm going to call this Blazor Train, and the domain name is going to be Blazor Train. The rest of this is pretty obvious. United States. I got my subscription. I'm going to create a new resource group. And then I'm going to go to Review and Create. I pass validation, so I'm going to hit Create. And while this is in progress, and it is taking a few minutes, I just need to tell you that if you already have an Azure Active Directory B2C tenant that has the social features in it, the social authentication features, you can go ahead and use that. That's fine. But it's probably a good idea to create a new tenant for every app that you're going to support. If you have a customer and that customer needs their own tenant, that's what tenant is. It's a customer, essentially. So it's going to map to your authentication for this particular app or this particular customer. And finally, it says, tenant creation was successful. Click here to navigate to your new tenant, Blazor Train. All right, so here we are. The only thing that I've blacked out is my subscription ID, because that's my subscription that I use for every tenant. The first thing we're going to do is app registrations. So this is where we register an application. So I'm going to click on New Registration. And this application we're going to call MSAL Auth in Blazor. I don't know, it just came to me. And we're going to select the last option here for who can use the API. Accounts in any identity provider or organizational directory. Now here's the thing for Blazor. The platform, we have an option of, mobile and desktop native apps, web apps, or single page applications. Guess which one we're picking? Ding, 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 ding. Single page application. Now the redirect URI is going to be HTTP, not HTTPS, //localhost. You got to make sure that this box here, permissions, is checked off, and then click register. Now we've got some info that we can copy into our config file, like the client ID. Let's copy that to the clipboard, and that goes right here, client ID. And the tenant ID, or the directory ID, that goes right here. Now we're going to go to authentication, and we're going to select add a platform. We've already added our SPA platform. Now we need a web platform. So click web, and now the redirect URL is going to be interesting. It's going to be HTTPS, the tenant name, which in this case is Blazor Train, .b2clogin.com / tenant name again, Blazor Train, .on Microsoft.com / OAuth2 / auth resp authorization response. Okay, so now if you scroll down, we need to grant permission for access tokens and ID tokens. Keep scrolling down. We're also going to allow public client flows, and click Save. Okay, now we're going to go to certificates and secrets, and we're going to select new client secret. For the description, I'm going to enter MSAL Auth in Blazor space secret, and you can set the expiration time. We're going to leave it at 6 months. Now you get one chance to copy this value for the secret. It's right here. If you lose it, you can't get it back. You have to create a new secret. Let's paste it into client secret. Next, we're going to select expose an API. And so now we're defining a custom scope, and that restricts access to data and functionality that's protected by the API. So we're going to create a scope. And before we can do that, we have to set an application ID URI, which is just our client ID. See right there? Client ID starts with 8C. This is blazortrain.onmicrosoft.com with the client ID. All right, so just go ahead and save it. The scope name is going to be access_as_user. Of course, it can be anything, but this is descriptive. And if you keep this as a convention, you'll never forget it. Now we need a description here, call the secure web API endpoints. And for the consent description, which is shown to the user, allows the app to call the secure web API endpoints. Make sure state is enabled, and then select Add Scope. And now you can see down at the bottom of the screen, you've got your scope. Okay, now we need to go to API permissions. So these are configured permissions, and we have to add the permission, which is the scope we just created. So I'm going to select Add a Permission, select My APIs. There's our MSAL auth in Blazor app. And now the permission is already there. We just have to select it. Access as user, and then say Add Permissions. Now there's one other thing. Right here, I know you can't really see it, but it says not granted for Blazor Train. There, now you can see it. So that is the status for our access as user permission. You have to select this right here, grant admin consent for Blazor Train. As soon as you do that, this little guy turns green and you're off to the races. Now we're going to go to branding and properties, where we get the publisher domain, blazortrain.onmicrosoft.com, which is really just your tenant name.onmicrosoft.com, isn't it? That goes here in the domain. Now in the instance, we're going to set this to HTTPS blazortrain, because that's our tenant name, .b2c-login.com. Now the next thing that we need is here in the downstream API, the base URL. And we only get that after we publish this guy to Azure. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that our published application will have the name Blazor Train Secure Web API. So it's going to be HTTPS Blazor Train Secure Web API .Azure websites.net /. So this right here is going to be the name under which we publish this API. And let's do that now. I'm going to use Azure App Service. Now this is where you need to set your subscription. I'm going to create a new app service called, you guessed it, Blazor Train Secure Web API. And I'm going to use that same resource group that I have for my tenant ID. Now we click Next, and we're going to skip this step, API management. We don't want that. And when this is done, we're going to close it, and now we can just simply publish it. All right, so this is an error, and that's okay. It's only for security reasons because Swagger is only enabled running in development mode. All right, now that we're published, we can go back to our Azure AD B2C tenant and select Identity Providers. Now this is where you can select from Amazon, Apple, Facebook, GitHub, which looks like it's in preview, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, and Twitter, and a whole bunch of other things. So we're just going to use Microsoft for now. We're going to enter the name Microsoft. I don't know, it just came to me. We're going to go back to our app settings and grab the client ID. That goes here. And we need the client secret. And that goes here. Now click Save. Next, we're going to create a user flow. So scroll down to Policies, User Flows, and we're going to create a new user flow. This is going to be for sign up and sign in. I'm going to leave the recommended version in there. Now the name is going to be social_Susie. Susie stands for sign up, sign in. Now for identity providers, we want email sign up. This means that users can create accounts in our Azure AD B2C with an email and password, and they can use that to log into our app. That's good. We're also going to select Microsoft because that's the only identity provider we have configured so far. If we configure other ones like Twitter and Google and Facebook and all that, we could select those as well. We're going to leave the defaults for multi-factor authentication, but we're going to show more user attributes in token claims. And then we're going to select collect attribute for display name. You can do whatever you want here. Now we're going to create the user flow. Now we can actually test this. So we're going to click on our user flow, select run user flow. The only application we have is MSAL Auth in Blazor. The reply URL is already set. And I'm going to drop down access tokens and make sure that you select MSAL Auth in Blazor. There you go. Now we can run the user flow. So this is what your users are going to see when they go to log in. You could sign up if you don't have an account, and that will create an account for the user with their email address and password. But we're going to select sign in with your social account. And this is what you should get. MSAL Auth in Blazor needs your permission to view the basic profile and view your email address. Don't select yes just yet. We're going to wait until it's in the application. If you don't get here, then you typed in something incorrectly. Now that our user flow has been tested, we're going to add the Blazor Server application to this solution. And we're calling it, guess what? MSAL Auth in Blazor. Now I know that this is also the name of our app registration. It doesn't matter. Select the defaults. That's right, you don't need to select the authentication type. Now we're going to add a NuGet package for this guy too. For this, I'll go to the Package Manager console. Just make sure that you've selected MSAL Auth in Blazor as the default project, and we're going to install Microsoft.Identity.Client. Next, we need to be able to read these settings. So we're going to create a settings class, and it's going to have fields for all the information that we need. Now, NestedSettings is another class that we have to create. And now settings isn't complaining. So this is just for scopes. Now here's the thing. This is a string value. So we have an array of nested settings that have string values. It seems like there's an extra layer there, and there is, but you need it. So in order to turn that into an array of strings, we need to add an extensions class. Okay, so this extension is for an array of nested settings, and it's called toStringArray, and it returns a string array. Simple enough. Trust me, you're going to need it. Next, we're going to create a folder called MsalClient. To that, we're going to add an interface class called IPCAWrapper. So this is going to be a wrapper for all the public client application or PCA code that's available in Microsoft.Identity.Client. So now that we have this interface, we can create a PCAWrapper from it, also in the MsalClient folder. So here we go. We're injecting a configuration, and in the configuration, we're reading the settings. We're getting the scopes, and then we're using this PCA builder to create this with the settings, with the authority, with the redirect URI, localhost. Boom. Now we have this PCA, and that is our iPublic client application. Now there's two ways that we can acquire a token, silently or interactively. So this is the code that gets it silently. And this is the code that does it interactively. We'll worry about this in a second. This is the code that signs out. That's pretty much it. But we do need this PlatformConfig. So let's add that now. So this is platform-specific configuration, right? And this is going to be used for our redirect URI and our parent window. We only have one platform, and that's Blazor. All right, now we have to go to Program for our Blazor app, and we're going to register as a singleton our IPCAWrapper. Now we have some more config to do. Going to go over to appsettings.json and replace it with a template from my repo. And I'm going to take the appsettings.json from the API, put that right next to this new one so I can copy these things in. Now we also need the secure web API URL, which is in our downstream API base URL setting. In this case, Blazor train secure web API.azurewebsites.net. All right, we're not out of the woods yet. We have to add a few statements to imports. We want our identity client. We want our data folder that has our weather forecast service. We want MSAL client, and we're going to use system text.json too. Next, I need a place to store the access token. You could do this in an app state or whatever, but I'm just going to create a little static class here called Globals. There it is, just a string, access token. So now we're ready to create login and logout buttons and use the PCAWrapper code to authenticate using MSAL.net. So I'm going to do that in MainLayout. Now, you don't need to do this in MainLayout. If you want to have your login buttons and all that stuff in the main page or whatever, that's fine. But this is easier. So here's what we have. So we've got a button to log out, a button to log in, predicated on this Boolean right here, is logged in. If you go down to the code, it's just a Boolean, and anytime that we set it, we're going to invoke status changed. Now when we log in, we're going to try to acquire the token silently. We've logged in before. We can do this silently. And if that fails, then we're going to acquire it interactively. If we log out, we're just calling PCAWrapper sign out async, setting logged in to false. Now I'm going to reuse the weather forecast service provided in the template, but modify the code to return the weather forecast data from our secure web API rather than random generated data. So let's go to data, weather forecast service, and redo it. And this is pretty much a good pattern for you to create a service for whatever secure API that you need to call. Or if you just want one, for the whole app, secure web API might be get weather forecast, right? You can add all the methods that you want here if they're all going to be using the same authentication method. So here in call secure web API, which again could be called get weather forecast, we're making sure that we have an access token. We're creating a result, which is a new list of weather forecast, creating a new HTTP client, creating a new HTTP request message, which is get. It's going to have the API URL plus weather forecast. And now we're going to add the authorization bearer header. So this is the syntax for that. It's bearer space, very important, and then the access token. And then we're going to send the request, get the response, and first we have to tell JSON that the property names case don't matter. I hate that we have to do this. Why do we have to do this? If you don't do this, it doesn't work. So now we're reading the content as a string, and we're deserializing that, ensuring a success status code, and returning the result. Now we're going to go to the fetch data page. And in this code down here, we're going to replace that with await forecast service.call secure web API. And now we should be able to run this. So let's make the Blazor app our startup project and let's give it a go. Okay, now counter, we didn't touch, no problem there. But fetch data, suspiciously empty. All right, let's go log in. And now we're being redirected to this page. We're going to sign in with our social account. We're going to authorize Microsoft. We get our user details, Carl Franklin, because that's the only thing that we had is the display name, remember? Click continue. And now we can return to the application, where now you see log out. Now if we go to fetch data, and there it is. So here's what we did. We created a secure web API application and deployed it to Azure. Then we created a new Azure AD B2C tenant and configured it for authentication using the Microsoft Identity Provider. Finally, we created a Blazor Server application and leverage the Azure AD B2C tenant to provide authentication support using MSAL.net. In the studio, Carl. I've been doing a lot of MSAL stuff lately. Check out my sister show, the .NET Show, to learn how to use MSAL in your Maui apps. It even works in Maui Blazor apps. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to wake up a slobbering drunk in car 5. It's a living. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time.
Blaze a train.